Hello. Today I'm going to run through a real quick demonstration of first how Recordset can actually influence your Access database, and then two, we'll run through a real quick creation of a record set. So I've created this really quick and simple database. It's called a goals database, and I have a couple underlying tables: a goals table, task table, and then I have a daily task table. And here shows all my goals that need to be done. And then I have a check today's tasks, right? So the purpose of this database is to take goals and tasks that I've predefined and to make sure I'm accomplishing those goals on a daily basis. Much like a lot of databases, we're pulling from one master table and pushing that into a more specific specified table. Now, a problem with that a lot of people run into is when you're pulling from a master table and you're wanting to populate that information into a more specific table. How do you do that? There's a couple ways you can do that. One is you could actually populate, like in our master table, the daily tasks. We could populate that with pre-populated data. The problem is we will never be able to change tasks. Another way is we can take our master tables, the goals and tasks, and we can put those into the form, and we can have it populate from there. That is going to and push into the daily tasks tables, right, into your specific tables. The problem with that is it can get really clunky with the GUI. So one method of doing this, the best method, is to use a record set. So from the Access database, let me just show you a record set in action here. I'm going to go ahead and delete the underlying data for today, which is July 22nd, 2013. You'll see that our specific table is now empty. And that's the form for that specific table. Right? I deleted it out there, it's empty. And that's what we want the end user to do. We want them to come in here and see an empty form and load it themselves or have the system automatically load it. Right? So I have an underlying macro, and we'll go to that macro real quick, which is right here. And this does everything for us. It pulls the information from the goals and tasks, makes sure and sees if those goals and tasks are in that database for today, and if they're not, it pushes them into that database. So let me go ahead and I'm going to load it real quick and show you it appending the data in there. And if I refresh that form, you'll see that information in there, and that was done completely from that Visual Basic macro and the record set that was pulled. So let's go in there. I'm going to go in. Oh, hang on. I'm going to go into that daily task table. Let's go refresh them, and you'll see those data that the information from that table was deleted is now in there. So let's delete it again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that macro, and I'm going to put a stop in here, and we're going to step through this macro real quick so that you can see it pull the record set and push it into the table. Well, you're not going to see it. Like I said, what a record set does is it basically does a select statement on the data and pulls it into the cache of the computer. You're never seeing it on the GUI, and that allows you to manipulate it within your Visual Basic code. So we go back here, and we're going to refresh, and it's all gone. Now when we hit that, it pulls us into the code, and we're going to step into this code. The first is just a string variable with the select statement on it. Then you're gonna set the record set, and you're gonna open it up, and you're gonna base it on that select statement that you pulled, and open the record set, and then it's gonna set R as your record set, and that's gonna be in memory cache. So right now we've opened up that record set, and it's in memory cache, and we're gonna step through each and every one of them. And then once we go through, now we're going to do an if statement, and you can do whatever you want at this point when you're manipulating data, but right now I'm checking to see if that data is in that daily tasks. And if it's not, I'm going to run an insert statement and push that information into there. And there's our append row. And once again it cycles through and it appends, and let's just run through the rest of these real quick to get them pushed in there. All right. Now, if we go back to the database and we open up the today's tasks, you'll see that information is put in there, and that the data that we had deleted out of there, you'll see is now put in there. Right there, all for 722. Now you can kind of see the power of what a record set brings to you. It actually lets you do processes within the sorry about that. It allows you to do processes within the macro that you normally would require some either GUI workaround or some other person running it. And you can put it in your VBA script. So now let's create a new subroutine so you can see how this is working. So we're going to call it load goals, and I'm not too worried how pretty it looks. YouTube, there we go. So then we have our SQL. See, you can call it whatever you want. This is just the main variable, and I'm just going to put SQL in there for now. Then you add your record set. Then you're going to set your record set. Then you're going to use the current database and open record set. And you're going to use the SQL statement from above. SQL C. And then I like to close it. And then set R equal to nothing. That way we know that it'll shut everything out. Now if we go back to our Visual Basic, right here, so what you can do is you can create the query select statement for the macro if it doesn't crash on you. So here's our task table, and we're going to pull our data from our task table, and that's what we're going to use as our record set, and we're going to run through that. So let's go ahead and create our SQL statement. And we're going to bring in the task table. Oops. One of my terrible habits. I love to bring in tons of tables all at one time. There we go. If we run it, there's our data. So we can go down, you go to the SQL view, you can do a copy paste, or just a copy on that. We run it, then we go to our Visual Basic, and we can post that in there. And there we go. Now it should run through this. Hopefully no errors. There we go. We basically opened that up and then closed it. Not too fancy yet. So let's do a message box. And we're going to put ID. Actually, you put R for the record set, and then you're going to put an exclamation point so it knows that it's pulling a record set data, and then you're going to use ID for the first one. Alright, so let's run through this real quick. There we go, number 1. And it's going to close it. So now let's set it up so it iterates through all the record sets within the Access database. So it goes through each one of these, so it steps through each one. So let me get so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste from the code below and explain each of the pieces of code that I put in there. So here's the first if statement. And basically what this if statement is doing is making sure that the table actually exists and there's data in it. So see, it'll say if there isn't any data in there, if there is, it'll give us a message box of the ID. And then if there isn't data in there, it'll send us a message box telling us that a user that there's no records in the record set. If you don't have any tasks in the table, it's not going to do you any good. So let's step through this again using F8. We open up the record set, and there we go. There's our one. And it hasn't stepped through, but I always like to double check as I'm going along to make sure that I'm doing everything right. So what we want to do is we're going to do r.move first, right? And that puts us at the first record. Then we're going to do a do until statement. We're going to do it until end of field equals true. I suppose you could just do until end of field. There's our little message box. And then we're going to do r dot move next. And that's going to iterate us through the field. And then we're going to do a loop back to that do statement. Hopefully this works and I didn't mess up this recording. So there we go. There's our message box ID. ID 1. Move next. ID 2. 3. Now let's just go through the rest of these. There we go. Alright, now let's go back to Access and we're going to go ahead and define a more complex SQL query because we're going to pull in that goals table too. Right, so we have the goals table in there. If we go ahead, I'm going to actually swatch these around. Alright, so there we go. We run it. There we have our information. We're going to pull our data from goals. Put it down there. We run it again. There's our goals. Now if you notice I have a Boolean field in there for inactive on tasks and goals. That way I can, in the future, check inactive and they don't get pulled up. So I'm going to put no on those inactive fields. So when I run this, there you go. You're going to pull all your goals that you want to check for that day. We go into the SQL view, and then we copy it. And I like to kind of put it down below. That way I kind of get more control. Now at the end of the select statement, when you copy and paste it in, it's going to do a carriage return. I always like to keep that the way it is. So you want to put a space, and then you want to put your close out there, and then you want to do an ampersand and then an underscore, and then you'll see. You want to do that for this next line too. You put a space, ampersand, underscore, your quotation mark, and there you have it. Now it should run. Oops, let me stop this. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that top one that we had before, and we have our new select statement in there. And if I'm recording here, so we're going to run it, and I'm going to tell you right now it's going to fail. It's going to fail right there because the item's not found in the collection. Now what the problem here is that it doesn't know which ID to take from. It thinks because you have both the ID from the goals table and the ID from the task table. So what you want to do is you want to put a box around it. You put goals and then an exclamation mark, and then close it out, and that should, whoops, I'm not found in, I lied. Oh, not an exclamation, you want a period. There you go, number 2. And it'll move next, right? So I'm going to go ahead and stop that. Let's go back, let's run it. Here's our query that we want to pull. So let's just pull in goal and task, okay? So we're going to do, well, let's keep the goal ID in there. And then we're going to do an ampersand to concatenate. We'll do an exclamation point with a quotation, another ampersand. And then remember that if it doesn't have two of the same values in the table, that you don't box it. But if it does, you do box it. So we know that goals goal doesn't have a second value. There's no second value for goal. Right? If we go back, right, there's no second value for goal. You can even see up there where it has the dots on the top of your access query. That's where you're going to need to put that. You're going to have to put it in the box, okay? So we don't need it for goal and we don't need it for task. So we do our ampersand, put our quote, and all we're doing here is just putting a space in there so when the message box doesn't look too cluttered. So we're going to put our task. Now this should work. If it doesn't, there we go. So we have 2 goal ID is exercise 30 minutes, and it'll iterate through all the rest of them. So there we have it. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is we want to look at, because remember we're pulling from the goals and tasks, and we found the goals and tasks that we want that are active. Now we want to make sure that those are in the daily task table for today's date, right? We're looking at one table and making sure that the comparable data is in another table, right, based on those fields. And one way to do that is use DLOOKUP. And I'm just going to go down and copy this DLOOKUP so you can kind of get a sense of what it looks like. So right after as a matter of fact, we're going to comment out this message box. And, well, no, we won't comment out. I lied. We'll put the DLOOKUP right here. Let's line it up. Go tab. Keep our r dot moved in next. And then end if. Now let me explain the DLOOKUP. It's basically like a select statement. So if we put the paren in here, it'll show us the values. Expression is string, domain is string, and our criteria. So the daily tasks is the table, right? ID is the field within daily tasks, and then after in your third area is going to be basically your where statement. Now if we go back and we look at the Access database, here's our daily tasks, right? We want tasks with the ID, right? We don't care what values pull it up. And we want it with the task ID of the active tasks, and then we want the date. Now I know it might be getting confused here, but essentially what we're saying is from the daily task table, look up the ID, where the task's ID in that table is equal to the Recordset tasks ID that we pulled. There it is, our Recordset tasks ID, just like we pulled down in the message box, right? And then where task date equals format date. And basically that's pulling in today's date. I'm not going to get too deep into this, but basically what it's doing is if that's data matches up with the one table with the other table, on the if statement it'll send the message box. So let's tab through it, and there it is. All right, it was able to find it in that table. Now when we go back, let's delete these 7/22 dates out, and you'll see that when we step through it this time, it didn't mark it as next, right? It was not able to find that data in that database. Now again, the DLOOKUP, it's like a select ID from daily tasks, and the rest, the third comma over, the third criteria, is your where statement. And you can see that we're actually building that where statement as we go along. Like if we do a message box here, I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about. So let's do a message box up here, and we'll copy and paste that where statement in. Right? So if we go through and we see that there, task ID equals 1 and task date, and it has the hash marks around it to show that it's a date format. Okay? So if we look at that, let's go back and look through that where statement, right? Like I said, it's just building a text. We have task ID equals, then our ampersand to concatenate, then we're using our for the record set, the task ID that we pulled from the record set that's in there, then our ampersand, and then we have tasks date, and we're doing a format date. This is Visual Basic here. Format date to pull the correct format in for the date value that we're looking up. And if we go back to the Access database, you can see, like, here's our daily tasks. Let's do this, right? Run, right? So let's say we're on the iteration for tasks ID 1. So we want 1. Oops. We want 1. We run it. It's going to show us all the 1s. And then if we do 722 2013, and see it puts the hash marks around it, and it shows 1, right? And if we deleted that out of the database, it wouldn't show it. And if you do the select statement, there is your where statement. And I hope you're understanding how the DLOOKUP works. So if we we'll just put message box so we can kind of line it up. So you can see tasks ID equals and you're basically building that statement. I kind of have it backwards here. Right? And you just kind of got to get used to using, you can look up DLOOKUP, how to build that where statement a little bit. It's going to be different for all the different tables that you use, right? But if you want to make it simple, you can create one value in a small database and just like remove the task date off and have task ID equals task ID, and you'll get the gist of it. So let's run it real quick. Right? F8 goes through and it finds it. And it's going to give us both those. It's going to give the message box for when it finds it, right? Task ID 4. So let's test this real quick. If we go back into daily tasks, we'll do a refresh, make sure we get all the data in there. You'll see those 722 dates. Now if I delete those out of there, when I run that macro, it shouldn't find that in the database. And it doesn't. It moves next. So next, what we want to do is we want to put an insert statement. So after the else, we're going to put an else in there. So we go back to our if statement. Sorry, this is actually the second video that I've ever done. So what happens is when it doesn't find it, it's going to do an insert statement, and it's going to insert into daily tasks task date and task ID from, and we're going to do a select statement, just like a regular insert statement, and it uses a select statement to insert into the database. Right? You can build these on the SQL statement, and most people should be used to insert statements. So let's run through it. It doesn't find it, else, and it appends. There's our appends that we saw before. Right? So we're going to append all of them. And now if we run it, it's going to run through, and it's going to, because it found them. Now, we can rebuild this insert statement in the SQL statement so you can kind of see what it looks like. Here, we'll create a new one. There's our SQL statement. Doing kind of a complex thing here for one of my first few videos. So there's my insert statement. Insert into daily tasks, and we're going to take out our little now remember, this is, date as expression. But remember, this is actually building a number for our task ID that it's iterating through. So we should be able to go to our design view. Oh, I got that quote still in there. There we go. Just like a regular insert statement, append into task date and task ID. And then we go back to the statement, and there you have it. That's the gist of it, right? You do this, it's going to run in, it's going to pull that record set. We're using that record set, it's in the cache, right? Then we're setting the if statement to see if the table even exists. And if it does, it's going to move it to the beginning of that record set that we pulled. Then it's going to loop from, here's our loop in here, and it's going to loop until it's to the end of it. Now we have the DLOOKUP, and what we're taking is we're taking our data from the record set, and using that DLOOKUP function, we're trying to make sure that the data exists in the daily task table. And if it does, it's going to put out information. Now we could comment this out. So we're going to run through this here. We should just do like this. So you probably put a better message in there. Sorry. We're going to put a little better message in here. Data already in table. How about daily tasks table? Okay. So when you run it, it's going to tell us data already in daily task table, data already in daily task table. So it's going to run through each one, right? Now, if you noticed before, I just commented that out. We don't really need to tell us that it's not in the table for each one. So if we go back to the table and refresh, it's in there. Here's our daily tasks. We refresh. We see the data. The statement was correct. We're going to delete this out. We're going to go back. This time, when we run it through, it's going to tell us that it's not in the table. And it's going to do an insert statement. Right? So we run the rest of them through, and it inserts into the table. Oh, I'm rerunning it again. Alright, so now for the last part of it, let's just put a button on there, on our table, or on our form. We'll put a button. Let's reload here. We're going to put a button on there. So let's go and we'll put this in design view. We're going to throw a little button on there. Here's our new button. We're just going to cancel. So we have our button on there. And then for event, we'll do code builder. And then we have on our command click, right? And we want to reference that subroutine that we just built when we click on that command 13 button. So now when we go into design view, we hit that command 13, it should run the macro that we just created. Now I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the other one below. I'm actually going to comment this one out. Problem learning multiple programming languages is you tend to get them all confused sometimes. So there we go. We hit our command 13. It does nothing. So what we can do, I did down here, I put a little finished just so we know that it's all done. So I'm going to add the same kind of thing up to the top here. Yep, and I'm not closing those record sets. Remember the R close and set R to nothing? So let's put those in there. I've probably got tons of databases hogging memory. So command 13, finished, right? Same thing as we have for the other macro, finished. And then we're going to go in there. Let's go ahead and delete that data out of there. We'll do a refresh. Make sure we have all our data. We delete the data out of there. We click our button. It appends. You see the deletes. I should have cleared that out of there first. We do a refresh. Boom. They're in there. If you look at the daily tasks, the data that let's do a refresh. You'll see the stuff that we deleted is now in there. Alright, that's basically about it. It's been a little bit of a long tutorial. This is a much more complex tutorial than I've ever done before. It's actually like my first tutorial. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope I get a little bit better at this. Thank you very much.